Who would have thought that he survived such a deadly trial, a cauldron of boiling oil, yet he miraculously survived? That man was John, popularly known in the scriptures as John the Beloved, the disciple of whom Jesus handed over his mother to and him to his mother. But what really transpired? What led to John being boiled and him surviving? What is the story behind one of the most surprising miracles of God's saving power? As you know by now, this channel is dedicated to searching out the scriptures and bringing to surface mysteries hidden among the Word of Life. To support this channel, kindly drop a like and subscribe to this channel to increase our visibility to other believers. Now, without further delay, let's delve into this apostle whose life stood out of the rest and off all the disciples was the only one to die of natural causes. Who is John? John the Apostle was one of Jesus' closest disciples and is identified more than once in the New Testament of the Bible as the one whom Jesus loved. John was the son of Zebedee, brother of James, and a fisherman by trade. Since James is consistently listed first whenever the two are named in the Bible, it is assumed that John was the younger of the two. Both worked for their father Zebedee, who was also a fisherman. John, James, and a third disciple, Peter, were the only three present with Jesus when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, when the transfiguration of Jesus occurred, and in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before Jesus was crucified. John and Peter were the two chosen to go ahead of the others to make preparations for the Last Supper, during which John was seated next to Jesus. The Apostle John is the only one of the 12 who was not martyred and who stood at the foot of the cross with Jesus' mother during the crucifixion. The Apostle John was born in and grew up in Galilee and was the son of a fisherman named Zebedee and his wife Salome. Some believe that Salome was the sister of the Virgin Mary, though this is not explicitly stated in the New Testament. John is often affiliated with his brother and father, being called John, son of Zebedee, and John, brother of James, at different points throughout history. John the Apostle, or the Apostle John, was one of three primary disciples of Jesus, along with John's brother James, as well as Peter. Apostle John is known as the son of Zebedee and the brother of James. So fervent were the brothers about their commitment to Jesus and his message, which often led them to hasty actions, that Jesus named them Boanerges, also known as sons of thunder, because of some character traits such as the zeal exemplified in Mark chapter 9 verse 38 and Luke chapter 9 verse 54, when they wanted to call down the fire of heaven on a group of Samaritans who rejected Jesus and his disciples, earning the brothers' reproaches from Jesus. Because of their importance or closeness to Jesus, the two even asked him if they could be seated on thrones beside Jesus in his glory, to which Jesus replied, "It is not his to give." Having such an incredible background story filled with adventure-like events, Apostle John faced persecution just like every other apostle, either those who were direct eyewitness to Jesus' existence and those who were adopted by God into his family, and later blessed with the apostolic calling like Paul. They all faced persecution, either imprisonment, death by stoning, hanging, crucifixion, stabbed or nabbed, poisoned or waylaid and killed. John was no different. There were different instances where he was persecuted. There were instances where he was poisoned, but as the word of Jesus said, "You shall take in deadly substances, and they shall by no means harm you." Amongst all his persecutions, there seemed to be one that significantly stands out, which is boiling him in oil. Boiling in oil. Death by boiling is a method of execution in which a person is killed by being immersed in a boiling liquid. While not as common as other methods of execution, boiling to death has been practiced in many parts of Europe and Asia. Due to the lengthy process, death by boiling is an extremely painful method of execution. Executions of this type were often carried out using a large vessel such as a cauldron or a sealed kettle filled with a liquid such as water, oil, tar, or tallow, and a hook and pulley system. This is one of the most painful kinds of punishment, similar to crucifixion, but worse in its own way. Boiling someone to death was an unspeakably agonizing endeavor. Though the Roman Emperor Nero reportedly killed thousands of Christians with this method long before the Middle Ages, it would also become a popular way of punishing coin forgers, especially in the Holy Roman Empire. Later on in Britain, King Henry VIII introduced the practice of boiling to death as a way to execute people who used poison to commit murder. As one might expect, people sentenced to this punishment were simply placed in a large container of heated liquid, which might be water, oil, wax, or even molten lead. and then they basically got cooked. The sensation of being boiled alive was an absolutely horrific one. The method could be made even worse if the water had yet to reach boiling temperatures by the time the person was submerged. Oftentimes, the limbs and extremities were the first things to burn. After the person's outer layers began to cook, their organs began to cook as well. The fluids rose in temperature until they were also boiling. All who went through this medieval execution could only pray for a fast and merciful death, but boiling to death was unfortunately a very slow process. A quick death would only come if the liquid was already boiling when the victim was dunked in. They might also be able to speed up the process if they ducked their head underneath the liquid to boil their brain. But otherwise, it was long and torturous until the very end. Boiling to death was undoubtedly one of the worst possible ways to die in the Middle Ages. Since the victim would probably remain conscious, he'd notice his eyes burning, clothes fusing with his body, and skin blistering. While this should have been reserved for only the worst offenders, it soon became the go-to execution method for forgers of all people, who order for John to be placed in a cauldron of boiling oil. Emperor Domitian, an egocentric figure who ruled Rome. Emperor Demission, the self-proclaimed Lord and God and ruthless dictator, reigned from AD 81 to 96. He was the son of Emperor Vespasian and the brother of Titus, the conquerors of Jerusalem in AD 70. He is often referred to in history as the self-defied emperor. Domitian had a definite ego problem. In imperial Rome, the Senate would deify an emperor upon death. However, like Gaius Caligula and well attested by ancient writers, Domitian could not wait until death and deified himself. In an ancient tribute writing of about 61 to 113 AD, a particular part of the writing referred to Emperor Domitian as a madman, blind to the true meaning of his position, who used the arena for collecting charges of high treason, who felt himself slighted and scorned if we failed to pay homage to his gladiators, taking any criticism of them to himself, and seeing insults to his own godhead and divinity, who deemed himself the equal of the gods yet raised his gladiators to his equal. It is not entirely surprising that during the course of history, certain men have called themselves God due to their ever-expanding territories, wealth, authority, and power, and amount of victories won in battle. King Nebuchadnezzar, Pharaoh, Herod, and Caesar all fall within this category. They always demand to be worshipped and revered among the people, forgetting their mortality and that they were born, breastfed, and also grew up to be the man they were. A good number of them questions the true God's authority, to which God himself responds, showing them that they are also part of his creation, connecting the boiling in oil to the emperor and apostle John. During the 5 decades of his ministry, John witnessed the rapid spread of the gospel and the rabid opposition of the Roman world against both it and its followers. When the church suffered persecution under Nero, John, along with the other apostles who were alive, worked hard to strengthen the faith of the believers and to encourage them to cling to Jesus. When Peter and Paul fell to Nero's tyranny, John survived. He lived to be quite old, witnessing the destruction of Jerusalem and the ruin of the temple just as Jesus had predicted so many years before. But John's ministry was interrupted by the hatred of the Jews. Their continuous accusations against him gathered enough momentum to have him summoned to Rome to answer for his faith. During his trial, his words were misconstrued and his views misrepresented. Given the chance to defend himself, John presented the facts clearly and lucidly, but the more convincing his testimony, the more rabid the expressions of hatred hurled against him. Enraged by John's reasoning and unbowed courage, the Emperor Domitian ordered him to be cast into a cauldron of boiling oil. It was a cruel way to die, but Domitian was determined to destroy the final surviving disciple of Jesus in the cruelest way he could think of. As John was placed in the cauldron, the boiling oil did nothing to scald or mar his skin or his body. He sat there, as serene as a man in a vat of warm water. Defeated the Romans, but more importantly, defeated the emperor. They later had no choice but to haul him out. But Domitian couldn't release him, so he exiled John to Patmos, which was nothing more than a barren rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea. How did Apostle John survive? As we have read earlier, it was a rather obvious miracle God performed to win souls to himself and also prove to the emperor that if he had not given permission for a person to die, then death shall not befall them. John was poisoned, boiled in oil amidst other persecution, but yet the word of Jesus stood firm. Remember, Jesus said to the disciples, "If I will that he, John, stays alive till I return, what is that to you?" John chapter 21 verse 22. Although Jesus didn't clearly say that John would not die, he only responded to Peter's question about John's work. It was noise abroad amongst Jesus' followers that John would not die, but he did, not as a martyr but of natural cause. John the Beloved lived a supernatural life, saved from all forms of murderous attempts by the Jews and Romans. On the island of Patmos, he received a glorious revelation, a revelation that watered down the means at which men of his time saw vision or knew thing about the future, and also a revelation that revealed the future of the world and offered an insight on the world to come. If you enjoyed this video, kindly give a like and subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification button so you get alerted when we drop a new video. God bless you.